If you really look at ancient Near Eastern warfare, you quickly realize that the whole standoff in the Valley of Elah, it wasn't just a battle of physical strength.
No, not at all. It was basically, well, an exercise in psychological destruction.
Right. Because the Philistines, they utilized this tactic. It's known as single combat champion warfare.
Right.
And the goal wasn't just to field a terrifying giant.
Right. The goal is to induce this state of, collective learned helplessness in the opposing army.
Yeah, exactly. You showcase a threat so completely disproportionate to the enemy's capabilities that their entire cognitive framework for resistance just shorts out.
It's a calculated paralysis. I mean, the scriptural text actually notes that the Israelite army, and these are trained soldiers, mind you, they were hiding in the rocks.
Wow.
Yeah, they weren't just intimidated. Their operational capacity was entirely shut down by the sheer scale of the anomaly standing out there in the valley.
Which makes the arrival of a young, completely unarmored shepherd boy into that same valley such a fascinating disruption of the psychological environment. It really is.
Well, welcome to this deep dive into the source materials of the Come Follow Him project. Today, we're basically unpacking a set of custom song lyrics designed to teach the Old Testament lesson for June 15th through the 21st, titled The Battle is the Lord's. We're going to be looking at the text covering 1 Samuel 17 and 18, chapters 24 through 26, and also 2 Samuel 5 through 7.
And we are examining these texts through a really highly specific lens today. We're looking at 5 distinct musical arrangements of the exact same lyric.
5 of them?
Yeah, the project provides us with a sweeping classical orchestral anthem titled Trust in the Lord.
Okay.
Then there's a slower country gospel waltz called A Kingdom of Mercy, a modern worship track named The Battle is the Lord's,
Love that one.
a Southern gospel choir piece named No Stone in His Sling, and finally a deeply intimate Celtic folk song called Don't Battle on Your Own. So 5 totally different genres, but one set of lyrics. And hidden within those lyrics are exactly 3 verbatim phrases lifted straight from the King James Version of the Bible, right alongside a series of really deliberate paraphrases.
Right. And we are going to trace the sequence of these lyrics to understand how the text moves us from physical courage to moral courage and ultimately to a much larger theological truth.
Let's just jump right in. Let's look at the opening stanza. Verse 1 says that whole psychological scene in the valley we were just talking about. Let me read it.
Go for it.
Okay, it says, a giant came down where the valley grew wide. I defy the armies of Israel, he cried. But a young shepherd boy was not greatly dismayed. The God who once saved me will come to our aid.
Okay, so the lyric immediately anchors itself to the biblical text with our very first verbatim KJV phrase, I defy the armies of Israel.
Yep, there it is.
And that is pulled directly from 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 10. And it is so crucial to understand the nature of that defiance.
How so? Like the legal aspect of it?
Exactly. By defying the armies, he is legally and theologically defying the sovereign of those armies.
Oh, wow. The God of Israel.
Right. It is a direct challenge to their covenant identity.
That makes so much sense. But look at the literary foil constructed in the next line. The text says David was not greatly dismayed.
Yeah.
And on a surface level, that phrasing almost sounds, I don't know, too casual. Like he's merely inconvenienced by a 9-foot-tall, heavily armed champion.
Right. Like, oh, bother, a giant.
Exactly. But it's actually a really deliberate mirroring of the scriptural text in 1 Samuel 17.11, which explicitly states that King Saul and his army were greatly afraid.
Oh, that contrast is the entire point.
Right.
The lyrics are placing David's emotional baseline directly against the army's emotional baseline. You have a collective state of panic that learned helplessness, we discussed earlier, contrasted with a localized state of calculated calm.
And I would argue that calm isn't just naive bravery. It's a recalibrated threat response system, like modern-day imposter syndrome almost, where everyone else is paralyzed by the impossible hurdle. But the lyric continues, the God who once saved me will come to our aid.
He has data.
Exactly. David is operating on empirical data. When he was attacked by a lion and a bear previously, he experienced divine deliverance.
Right. The rest of the army is looking at the size of the giant relative to themselves.
Yes.
But David is looking at the size of the giant relative to the God who already delivered him. He's accessing a totally different data set.
That is such a precise way to frame it. His historical context completely neutralizes the psychological warfare of the Philistines.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the methodology of the actual fight.
The lack of methodology, really.
Right. The pre-chorus and chorus just strip away every conventional mechanism of ancient warfare. Let me read this section because the inventory of what David lacks here is just staggering.
Let's hear it.
Okay. No sword on his hip, no shield and no spear, just the name of the Lord ringing out clear.
Mm-hmm.
And the weak become strong and the trembling stand tall when they know it is God who will fight for them all.
Such a good setup.
And then the chorus. The battle's not yours. You don't fight alone. He saves not with sword, but a strength of his own. No matter how loud, no matter how tall, the battle is the Lord's. Watch the giants fall.
Okay, so we find our second and third verbatim KJV phrases embedded right here. First, no sword, which is drawn from 1 Samuel 17:50.
Right.
That verse explicitly highlights that there was no sword in David's hand. And then we hit the anchor of the entire lesson from verse 47. The battle is the Lord's.
That's just so powerful.
It is. The lyric also utilizes a very close paraphrase here. No shield and no spear, which directly correlates to the armaments Goliath is described as carrying.
I really want to dig into the historical weight of that lack of weaponry, though, specifically the armor. Because the text in 1 Samuel details King Saul attempting to dress David in his own royal armor.
Right, which David subsequently rejects.
Yeah. And there's a political layer to that exchange that is so often overlooked. I mean, think about it. If David goes into the valley wearing the king's armor and he somehow manages to win.
It provides plausible deniability.
Exactly. Plausible deniability for divine intervention. Observers could just say it was the superiority of the royal bronze. Or that David acted as a proxy for the king, allowing Saul to basically claim the glory.
That political dynamic is highly relevant because Saul's armor was an institution. It represented the human mechanism for security.
Yeah.
By refusing it, saying, I have not proved them, David is not only making a practical choice for mobility, he is making a massive theological declaration.
He's stripping away any alternate explanation for the coming victory.
Exactly. He saves not with sword, but a strength of his own. The lyric highlights the absence of the sword to maximize the presence of the divine.
And replacing that heavy bronze armor is just a single phrase, just the name of the Lord ringing out clear. It's basically a modernization of David's actual dialogue when he says, I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts.
Right. And notice how the lyric contextualizes that scriptural phrase. The weak become strong and the trembling stand tall. Mm-hmm. When the physical armor is removed and the reliance shifts entirely to the name of the Lord, the psychological paralysis of the army finally breaks.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The narrative through line of these chapters demands a shift. And the song structure follows it perfectly.
It really does.
Because that lack of physical armor in the valley sets up the need for a totally different kind of restraint when the environment changes. We actually move from a physical threat in the open valley to a moral threat in the isolated wilderness.
Let's look at verse 2.
Yeah, let me read it. An outlaw in hiding, pursued by the king, with no weapon to hold and no stone in his sling.
Wow.
He spared his pursuer, refusing the crown, and trusted the Lord to bring righteousness down.
So the timeline advances here to 1 Samuel chapters 24 and 26. The geopolitical situation has completely inverted.
Yeah, it's totally flipped.
David is now a celebrated hero, but that fame has triggered King Saul's paranoia. So Saul mobilizes the military not against a Philistine champion, but against his own loyal commander.
Right. David is now a hunted outlaw hiding in the wilderness of En-Gedi.
And here we hit a just brilliant poetic and theological transition.
Oh, the no stone in his sling line.
Yes. The lyric states David has no stone in his sling.
I find this just fascinating. Because in the valley, the sling and the stone, those are the absolute instruments of his deliverance.
Mm-hmm. They were his signature.
Right. But in the wilderness, when he has the perfect opportunity to assassinate King Saul, the man actively trying to murder him, David effectively empties the sling.
Yeah.
He disarms himself voluntarily. And I just have to ask why. I look at it as a refusal to establish a precedent of regicide.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like if David kills the anointed king to accelerate his own rise to the throne, he basically validates assassination as a legitimate tool for succession. He would be building his kingdom on blood rather than divine appointment.
The political ramifications would indeed be disastrous for a future king. But I'd argue the primary driver is theological.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, he explicitly states he will not stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed. It requires an immense capacity for moral restraint.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
In the valley, David had to trust God to act immediately to defeat an enemy. But in the wilderness, David has to trust God's timing to remove an enemy, even while enduring active persecution.
It is so much harder.
It is, and the lyric captures this perfectly. He trusted the Lord to bring righteousness down instead of forcing the outcome himself.
Dropping the armor took physical courage. Emptying the sling took moral discipline.
Beautifully said.
Thanks. And that discipline, that absolute refusal to grasp at power through violence, it functions as a massive arrow pointing forward.
Which brings us to the bridge.
Yes, the bridge. This operates as the theological climax of both the scripture block and the lyrics. Let me read this because the perspective fundamentally alters here.
Please do. Give it the weight it deserves.
A promise was spoken to build him a throne, a kingdom of mercy that he'd call his own. Then the true son of David hung high on a hill. The battle was finished. He's winning it still.
Okay, so we have fully entered the realm of typology. The first two lines summarize the Davidic covenant outlined in 2 Samuel 7.
Right.
God denies David the opportunity to build a physical temple, but instead promises to build David a house, meaning a dynasty. God basically declares, I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever, promising a lineage where his mercy will not depart.
But historical reality tells us that the geopolitical kingdom of Israel eventually fractured, right? It fell. The throne of David did not sit occupied in Jerusalem forever.
No, it didn't.
So to fulfill that eternal covenant, the text requires us to look way beyond the ancient Near East. The lineage travels forward through centuries to arrive at the ultimate fulfillment, the true son of David.
This is the absolute crux of Christian theology woven right into the Old Testament narrative. Jesus of Nazareth is born into the lineage of David. And the parallels are just striking when viewed through this typological lens. Just as David was anointed but remained uncrowned in the wilderness, enduring persecution from the ruling authorities without retaliating, Jesus was the anointed Messiah who refused to violently overthrow the Roman occupation.
Oh, wow.
When presented with the opportunity to seize earthly power, he continually emptied the sling.
He possessed the power to call down legions of angels, yet he surrendered to the authorities. The true son of David hung high on a hill.
Yeah.
I mean, this realization completely recontextualizes every line we have read prior to this bridge. Think about how the mechanics of the song shift in retrospect.
Oh, so?
Well, when the chorus repeats, he says not with sword, we are no longer conceptualizing a shepherd boy without a bronze blade.
Right.
We're conceptualizing a savior who conquers sin and death through voluntary sacrifice rather than military conquest.
Oh, absolutely. The scale of the battle expands exponentially here. The Philistine giant was a threat to the mortal bodies of a single nation. But the giant Christ faces on the hill is the universal threat of spiritual and physical death that holds all of humanity in a state of terminal, learned helplessness. We completely lack the capacity to engage that enemy.
We were the army hiding in the rocks.
Yes.
And he stepped into the valley for us.
Oh, I love that. This is where the emotional architecture of the lyrics really reaches its peak, because the final chorus forces us to process this massive shift in scale.
Let's hear the final chorus.
Listen to how the familiar words change their meaning, and pay attention to the shift in imagery here. The battle is won, lay your burdens down. He saves not with sword, but a thorny crown.
Chills.
Right. The empty tomb speaks, though hell tries to roar. The battle is the Lord's. He reigns evermore.
The juxtaposition of the crowns is just a profound piece of literary synthesis.
It really is.
David refused the earthly crown in the wilderness out of obedience. Christ receives the thorny crown on the cross as the mechanism of salvation. Absolute vulnerability is transmuted into ultimate victory. And the lyric callbacks are so precise. Like in verse 1, the Philistine champion roars his defiance across the valley. In the final chorus, hell tries to roar, attempting that exact same psychological paralysis.
Yeah.
But the threat is neutralized by a single piece of evidence. The empty tomb speaks. The silence of the empty tomb is literally louder than the roar of the adversary.
Which is exactly why the declaration the battle is the Lord's shifts from a statement of faith regarding a future event to a statement of fact regarding a completed event.
Right, it's done.
He reigns evermore is the final eternal outcome of the Davidic covenant from 2 Samuel 7.
This theological depth, it's precisely why the choice of musical arrangement matters so much to how a listener receives the message.
Oh, 100%. Cognitive processing of lyrics is heavily influenced by instrumentation and tempo.
Yeah. Like if you engage with the soft Celtic folk version, Don't Battle on Your Own, the acoustic instrumentation and minor key nuances make the line, lay your burdens down, feel deeply pastoral. It acts almost like a neurological reset, a quiet assurance that you can cease your hypervigilance because the primary threat has already been handled.
Conversely, if you process these same lyrics through the modern worship track, the heavy percussion and major chord swells engage the listener's nervous system entirely differently.
Totally different vibe.
The realization that the empty tomb speaks becomes a communal, triumphant declaration. It is designed to mobilize rather than pacify.
And then the Southern Gospel Choir arrangement essentially takes that victory and grounds it in a rich tradition of overcoming immense historical struggles. The harmonies alone communicate resilience.
Yeah, they really do.
It just demonstrates that the core scriptural truths that divine strength supersedes human limitation can adapt to meet the listener's specific emotional state.
The text is robust enough to support both quiet surrender and loud celebration, because the Old Testament accounts of David are not merely historical footnotes regarding Bronze Age tribal conflicts. They are meticulously structured narratives designed to establish the patterns by which God operates, pointing invariably toward the ultimate redemptive act of Jesus Christ.
That is the definitive takeaway from this deep dive. The progression from the Valley of Elah to the cross at Golgotha is one continuous narrative of courage, restraint, and divine victory.
Absolutely.
As you consider the trajectory of these chapters, how David's greatest triumph required him to reject the king's armor, and how Christ's ultimate victory required complete surrender on the cross, it forces a really important question upon us today.
What's that?
Well, we often default to our own forms of heavy armor when facing the giants in our lives. We rely on our intellect, our defensive mechanisms, or our desire to control the outcome through force. But the text suggests that victory requires a completely different posture. So here's the question for you to mull over this week. What defensive weapons are you tightly gripping right now? What perceived protection do you need to intentionally lay down so that the Lord can finally fight your battle?
That is a powerful thought to leave on.
We really hope you will dive into the scriptural text of 1st and 2nd Samuel yourselves this week as you study The Battle is the Lord's. There's just a wealth of context waiting to be unpacked. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Burwalk.